You're listening to the Physio Matters podcast, this month in association with exerciseprescriber.com, and this is session 56.
Welcome back to Physio Matters. I'm still Jack Chew, but panic not. I'm not on this episode much, so you'll be pleased to hear lots of different voices, especially a new one, which I'll come to in a second. Thanks so much to all of you that downloaded and gave us feedback for the last episode with Eric Meara on hip pathology, young hip pathology, femoral acetabular impingement, hugely controversial area. I think we navigated it fairly well. It was great to chat to Eric ahead of our conference that he's coming over all the way from, I'm trying to think now, is it Denver, I think? He's coming from Portland. I don't know if they're even close, actually. But somewhere far, far away over in the States. And he's coming over in October to the conference, which will be great. And the program is out today. So if you're listening to this fresh from the press, then you will be seeing the conference program. Full 2 days is going to be out across social media today. So I might as well just give you a bit of a clue as to what that is in full, whistle through it. So that's 5th and 6th of October in Manchester, England, and we've got a massive lineup of guests. We've really tried to mix up the format, so we've got keynotes, but also panel discussions that follow those on the same topic, try and draw the audience into a big Q&A in Physio Matters style. There's also opportunities for us to ask our famously pertinent questions of the speakers at the time to really lead us into the Q&A rather than the damp squib sort of any questions and someone's got a half question on a detail. We don't want any of that at our show. So 5th and 6th of October in Manchester, be there, and hopefully this will whet your appetite. So let me just go through the programme. On day one, you've got a little welcome from me, which you only have to put up with for 15 minutes or so, followed by the first keynote, which is with Eric Meara, who I've just mentioned. He's going to be talking on reforming our relationship with exercise, talking through public health, biomechanics, that sort of stuff, as well as anything that we do where we influence and introduce exercise as a variable. I want to talk about that in detail. And then he sits down with Anne Gates of Exercise Works fame and Physio Matters fame, of course, and Brad Neal, also been on the show, a PhD candidate at St Mary's University and vocal advocate of exercise as rehabilitation, especially for patellofemoral pain. So they're going to be sitting down and discussing exercise in all forms and drawing the audience in. We've then got a keynote from Joletta Belton coming over, who's going to be talking about reforming patient engagement, talking about the patient's take on the matter, and sitting down with Pete Moore from Pain Toolkit, as well as Adrian McGregor, who was on Physio Matters a few episodes back, hugely popular episode, talking through his story and how we need to do better for people with persistent pain, but especially getting it right first time to stop people spiralling downwards into that. At lunchtime, there is grab some food, and if you want to, and only if you want to, you can then go into the working lunches, which is two of the focus groups each day from the Big R's project, talking about clinical variation under analysis, and then also outcome data sharing on day one. It's going to be talked about by our clinical excellence focus group and the reforming influence focus group, so much to come from those. Now, there's then an agitation session after lunch, which is by Roy Lilly, who's a policy analyst and famous noisemaker online, who's going to be talking about what do we want, what we're trying to get at, what is it that physiotherapy and MSK practice really needs to do to pull its socks up. That should be really interesting. We break out into them workshops, which is improving physio education with Joost van Wieken, progress in primary care practice with Paula Deacon, and then reforming research with Brad Neal, all at the same time in side rooms, doing some more practical sort of format stuff. Really interesting, varied formats from them, having spoken to them about their plans. We have a break. And then at the end of the day, on day one, we've got our day one debate, which is reforming orthopaedic triage. Who is best placed to assess patients referred to orthopaedics? And that's going to be with an orthopaedic surgeon, Rich Collins, who's an MSK physician, Emma Salt, who's a secondary care APP, and Steve Nawar, who is a primary care consultant for Connect Health. So they're going to be discussing who's best suited, and there's crisp distinctions between each of their positions on that. So it's going to be really interesting. There's not necessarily two sides, there's almost four sides, and they're going to hash that out, and that will be moderated by me or my team, which I'm really looking forward to. Into day two, then, first keynote of the day, Joe Gibson is talking about applying the biopsychosocial model, and then sits amongst Eric Meara and Liz Prokopowicz, which I'm sure I've mispronounced, I always get her name wrong, But both of those, all three of those, we're vocal advocates of biopsychosocial model, but also putting it under analysis and critique as to how we best apply it. One of the big conundrums of our time when it comes to reasoning. It'll be really good to hear Jo speak about that, especially because she's usually tied into her specialism of shoulders and unstable shoulders, which we've had her on the podcast for. But she's really polymathic in that sense, and so it'll be great to hear her talk on something a little bit broader. Followed by the keynote by Neil Langridge, The Place for Manual Therapy in Contemporary MSK Practice. Now, Neil was on Physio Matters last year, and it's the first episode, or only episode, to ever breach 50,000 downloads for an episode. I think it's on 52 now, so hugely popular topic, and he's a real voice of reason in that space. And so we're going to then sit him in there for The Place for Manual Therapy in Contemporary MSK Practice. It then goes into a panel with famed manual therapy skeptic or critic Adam Meekins and Carly Gibson, who's a contributor to the Big R's project and a really sensible voice in this space. Physio Matters supporter for many years, and someone that every time we hear her comment and feedback on things, it's always been extremely sharp, and we want to give her a platform to sort of try to wade in on that topic, which is a very important one. Then the Working Lunches for Day 2, Reforming Education Focus Group and the Reforming Clinical Governance Focus Group, talking about what we mean by education and then consistency in clinical governance. So really important topics again for you to join in with if you want, get involved with, but if you don't fancy that, then just get yourself some grub and you can network away. We then have an agitation session by my friend Martin Ongwen, known as Kenyan Physio on social media. He's from Nairobi, Kenya, and he's going to come and say, what might you inspire? A message from Africa, talking about the ways in which the noises that get made on the internet and the things that try to, all the policy details that we wade into, how they influence things in the developing world. So really looking forward to hearing that. I think it's going to be a really interesting angle. We then break out into workshops once more, a practical understanding of pain with Anina Schmid, advancing advanced practice with Heather Watson, and then in the spotlight, improving perceptions of MSK practice with Naomi McVeigh and friends. We're just yet to detail exactly how that one's going to be constructed, but it's going to be really about how MSK is perceived by interprofessionally, intra-professionally, and also then into the wider media. I think that's going to be a really interesting one. I'm spoilt for choice for where to split myself for those 3 sessions. The final break then leads us into our final keynote, which is with Anina Schmid, maximising your sciatica outcomes, some of the most difficult patients and difficult scenarios, difficult stories to treat. And so we want to make sure that we get the hot off the press evidence and analysis from Nina. Really looking forward to that. She sits then in a panel to close with Ash James, again, of Physio Matters fame. I keep saying that, don't I? But we're spoilt for guests here. And then Joletta Belton is going to give the patient's angle on those topics. I'll then wrap things up with a few cheesy puns to finish, and then you'll be out of the door by 5 o'clock. Find out more, www.reform.physio/conference. You don't want to miss out, and you certainly don't want to miss out on the party on the Friday night. Got some great bands and entertainment there, great food in the actual venue of the Museum of Science and Industry, which is just going to be amazing. So really looking forward to putting in a show for you there. So do sign up, reform.physio/conference. Really looking forward to it. Tickets still available for that. Although we expect a big surge this week. You'll hear us making more and more noise about it in the coming weeks. And we've got a new page up at reform.physio with all the speaker bios and it fully unpacking the programme for your delights. But that's enough of that. And into today's episode. But before I introduce I need to introduce the guest. I need to introduce our interviewer. And Felicity Thau is a valuable member of the podcast team and a long-time friend of mine. And it's been absolutely awesome to work with Flip on Physio Matters stuff for the last couple of years. But this is her first time behind the microphone, and she makes it sound so easy. Because she's got such a brilliant, inquisitive mind. It was the easiest thing to coach, really, because I just needed her to go on air and be her and ask the questions that emerged as she thought about them. Because she's a great thinker, great physiotherapist. Do check her out if you want to. If any physio needs up in the northeast, then check out FT Physio, which is her private practice. She's doing some phenomenal work, and so it's awesome to have her on the show. Now, this interview is on a topic that I knew very little about, and so. It was such an educational process for me to listen to. Like most of them are when I've not been on the episode, but this one's just something that's really blown my mind, so I hope you enjoy it. It's with Jason Silvernail discussing all things sleep and health and pain and all sorts of other things. He's a physio over in America who it's just great to get him on the show, especially on something so specific as well. But I'm sure we've got more to hear from Jason, so check out his stuff as he directs you at the end of the episode. But firstly, thank you so much to Flick, thank you so much to Jason, and I pass you over to Flick, who does the brief intros for this episode. So I'll see you at the other side.
Hi, I'm Felicity from the podcast team, and in April I was lucky enough to be invited to Oslo to live tweet on behalf of the podcast at the Pain Cloud conference. And it was testament to the quality of the speakers that we actually ended up the number 2 trend in Norway for a few hours on Twitter, which I will keep bringing up. Included in that lineup talking about sleep was Jason Silvernail, a physiotherapist or physical therapist and researcher from the United States with a background in the American military. I'm thrilled to be talking to Jason today and to be making my Physio Matters podcast debut on the topic of sleep. Jason, greetings from the UK. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Felicity, thanks. Thanks so much for inviting me on. It's really great to talk to you today. So my name is Jason Silvernail. I'm over here in the United States. I've been a physical therapist for 21 years. Oh my gosh, it sounds a long time. That makes me sound old. I might actually be getting there. So I've got a wide range of background in terms of things that I've done in PT, and we can talk a little bit about how I came to sleep a little bit a while longer. Most of the time that I've been a PT over here in the States, I've been in the United States military, and I'm a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army. And so part of that whole thing is I kind of got to give you my disclaimer here. So I'm on the podcast as Dr. Silvernail, not Colonel Silvernail. So everything that I say here today is my personal opinion and commentary and does not reflect the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, the Defense Health Agency, the United States Army, or the United States government. So we're just here talking to me, and I'm hoping to talk to people a little bit about sleep and why I think it's important, and a little bit about some of the physiological things that are important about sleep and how we can apply that in clinical practice.
No, sounds brilliant. And obviously we met at Pain Cloud where you were delivering a lecture on sleep. And I wondered what got you into this topic. It's not a common one, I think, and not a common topic that physios talk about.
Yeah, and I think more's the pity, I guess, as you could say. So I think that I'm on something of a mission to help people, especially in physical therapy and rehabilitation, understand a little bit more about what we can do to coach and help patients with lifestyle medicine ideas, lifestyle medicine concepts, and help them be more healthy, generally speaking, and help clinicians understand the connections of being more healthy in terms of lifestyle and how that affects the condition that they're there for in physical therapy. Now, it so happens that I was selected to be a member of a team in the U.S. Army talking about ways that as an Army we can help soldiers and family members be more healthy. So instead of kind of taking it from a medical care side, talk about what can we do to help people help develop a culture in the Army, extended, that helps people understand what healthy behaviors are and how to do them. And so that was called the performance triad. So the 3 parts of the triad are sleep, activity or exercise, and nutrition. So as a result of that, I ended up traveling all over the U.S. And overseas as well, where we have Army folks, talking to them about what they can do to improve their sleep, activity, nutrition, and how that's connected to their overall health, how that's connected to their stress management and their physical performance and their ability to do their job and their ability to take care of their families and all of those things. And so as a result, I spent many, many hours and many, many days teaching people face-to-face in small group settings these ideas and helping them coach each other and giving them tools to help them coach others. And so that's really one of the things that you spend enough time doing that and you look enough at the science, because we had to look a lot of the science of these things, of sleep, of nutrition, of activity and exercise. And I think it really changes your perspective about what's important to cover in the clinic. And it helps us see parts of the scientific database background that we all should share that we're not aware of. Part of the scientific literature that can make huge impacts on our patients, and maybe we should do a better job of leveraging it.
Mm-hmm. Have you worked just entirely in the military delivering that kind of advice, or have you worked more in the civilian population as well?
I've worked a little bit in the civilian population with giving talks and lectures and stuff, but I spent a very brief part of my career early on before I came into the military as a PT in the civilian world, a physiotherapist, I guess you would say. And so it's been almost all the time I've been in uniform in the military. Mm-hmm. So right. That's the system I'm most comfortable in. And so I've really found that over time, as I added some of these lifestyle coaching, behavioral medicine coaching concepts to my practice, it's really changed and helped my patients and helped the numbers of people I can help, and it has improved the ways in which I can help people. And I think that's really what we're all there to do in the clinic, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it sounds like it's certainly some advice we can take to your everyday members of the public as well. Certainly some
Yeah, I
advice
hope so.
to be had.
I
Yeah.
hope so. I mean, I think that's the big piece. I mean, we can't. I mean, just as we want people to know important ideas in the lay public idea about medicine, like, hey, maybe that herniated disc on your MRI, maybe it's not such a big deal, right? We want them to know that, but I think we also want them to know some very basic things about sleep. I mean, we spend about a third of our life asleep, and most of us know almost nothing about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's just not a recipe for success, right?
Yeah. Yep. But picking up from that, you're right. We probably don't. I mean, certainly we're not being taught that in physio school. Can you give us a bit of a brief on the physiology of sleep, probably for beginners?
Yeah, of course. So when I talk about this, I say let's zoom out big picture and let's think like what is sleep and what kind of physiological and cognitive things does it do for us? So I think there's a couple things to talk about here. So number one, we understand a lot about sleep, but there's still a lot of it that is really a mystery to scientists and researchers about exactly what happens metabolically, exactly what happens cognitively, exactly what its evolutionary purpose is, and how that impacts what we should or should not do or say about it, and how we should help people with it. So while we do know a lot of things, I'm on a mission to help people understand a lot of things about sleep, there's also a lot we don't understand. And I think when you hear that, you should say, my gosh, that sounds a lot about back pain, doesn't it? We know a lot about it, and we don't do a good job of applying what we know, but we also need to admit there's a lot we don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think in that sense, sleep medicine or sleep science is any different than musculoskeletal medicine or whatever area you work in as a medical provider. We know a lot of things. We don't apply those things well. And also there's much we have yet to learn. So that's kind of the beginning part of it. I would say, first of all, you can use sleep as a concept of recharging. So almost everybody's got a smartphone these days, right?
Yep.
So at the end of the day or after a lot of use, your phone drains down. The power in your battery will drain down. And it has to do somewhat with the time of day, right? Especially if you're out at work or whatever, but it also has to do with how much you use your phone, right? And so a big sleeping is like plugging your phone in at night or plugging your phone in during the day. It helps to recharge and restore some of the power or ability that your body has lost. One of the things it does is it helps build and repair tissue, right? So it improves the blood supply and flow to tissues that are healing or injured to help support their healing process. It also improves the metabolic flow or regulation of waste products versus building products in the body as we sleep. And it also does a lot of important things for us cognitively in terms of memory, emotion, and sort of just like housekeeping for the brain. If you think about your muscles, if you think about the blood supply to your muscles, there's a lot of blood in muscles. Where's the blood vessels in the brain? There aren't really many, are there? And so the question then is, my gosh, how do we remove waste products from the metabolic activities in the brain? Normally that's done through the blood supply, right? Or the lymph, right? In the body. How does that happen in the brain? Well, it turns out when we sleep, the brain naturally swells and contracts, and it improves the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid, which helps push out some of those metabolic waste products and helps it bring in new products as well. So one of the things that you might have heard about when it comes to things like Alzheimer's disease is this protein called beta amyloid. And that can build up in the brain. And people who've got Alzheimer's disease and different kinds of cognitive dementia issues sometimes have buildups of these beta amyloid. A big part of sleep is the swelling of the brain and the flushing out of those products and the flushing of proteins like beta amyloid, which might contribute to problems down the line. So that's an example of how the brain also has a metabolic process that sleep supports, and sleep supports a healthy cognitive process, and it helps the brain's metabolism as well as the body's metabolism. So during sleep, so it's like big picture purpose stuff. So while we're asleep, we've got critical changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and blood flow, right? So your heart rate tends to go down at the beginning of sleep. Your blood pressure goes down. There's a neurological paralysis of your muscles so that you're not moving around a whole lot during sleep. It helps clear tissue wastes. It helps repair and break down some of those body tissues, and you also see a natural fluctuation of your body temperature. So when it comes to sleep on the cognitive side, we talked a little bit about the metabolic waste clearing in the brain just now, but it's also a critical part of consolidating memories. So if you can think about your computer, you've got the big hard drive in your computer, and then you've got the little flash drive that you plug into your USB port, right?
Yep.
So your daily memory goes on the flash drive. Your job, your brain's job, is to get that on the hard drive for long-term memory. And the place where those memories are consolidated from short-term to long-term, a lot of that happens during sleep. We tend to call it the daily download, right? You're downloading what happened during your day and you're putting more of it on the hard drive, right? And so that's just a big picture process view of how sleep is consolidated and how that happens metabolically and cognitively. So it's like a one over the world big picture view of what happens during sleep, and we'll go over some more details a little bit later.
Sure. So both physical and mental benefits there, as you describe it, and also by the sounds of it, still being discovered.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot there's been an explosion in sleep science. There's been an explosion in the data and knowledge that we have about sleep and in the connections between sleep and health problems. But there is so much more to do to help us understand exactly what's going on and the ways in which we can better help people get better sleep and how we can improve not only how we approach sleep in the clinic, but how we can improve the messages that we need to help in the lay press and in regular folks outside of medicine to help them understand the importance of sleep as well.
Sure. And in terms of the detail of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, and non-REM sleep, could you tell us a little bit about the differences between the two and when you might expect to be in either type of sleep at different times of night?
Great, that's great. Let's talk about the sleep cycles. That's really what we're talking about. So the sleep cycle. So your body goes through a series of cycles when it's asleep. Each cycle is about 90 minutes. Obviously, that's not exactly 90 minutes, and it varies a little bit from person to person, but it's about a 90-minute cycle. And you go through 3 stages of sleep, and you also hit REM sleep in most cases during these cycles. So stage 1 is just sort of a light sleep just past wakefulness. So if you've ever had this feeling where you've gone to bed, and then shortly thereafter, something has woken you up and you wake up and you're kind of awake more or less right away, that's probably stage 1 sleep for you. Stage 2 is moderately deep sleep. And so when we say deep sleep, what happens during deep sleep? Your heart rate goes down, your blood pressure goes down, you start to get the natural paralysis neurologically of your muscles. Your brain does that to keep you from moving around too much. Those sorts of things happen during the deeper sleep stages. And so that's what happens during stage 2. So that the largest percentage of all the time you spend sleeping during the night is spent in stage 2, right? Then you get after stage 2, this is going to be a surprise, but it's stage 3, right? So stage 3 is deep restorative sleep. This is the place where your metabolism is at its absolute slowest and where the natural clearing of the metabolic waste in the brain, for example, is happening the most often, right? That's stage 3 sleep. Then as that cycle comes around, we hit REM sleep. Now, REM sleep is actually light sleep. REM sleep is not deep sleep, right? It is a light kind of sleep where you have rapid eye movements, REM, right, which is why we call it REM sleep. It's an increase in your heart rate, an increase in your breathing. There may be an increase of dreams at this time, although when and why dreams happen and that kind of stuff is definitely an area that we don't fully understand. And since it's not all that relevant for health, I don't tend to go into too much of that, especially talking too much about that, about dreams, and definitely not dream analysis. Oh my gosh, that's for
you're not having that dream catchers in the clinic. No.
Exactly. So those are the 4 stages. You've got stage 1, 2, and 3, and then you've got REM sleep. And so that's a cycle. So stage 1 is light. Stage 2 is a little bit deeper. Stage 3 is very deep. And then as you come back toward wakefulness, you hit REM sleep, and then you come back to stage 1. So each of those that's a sort of a circular stage. Each of those is about 90 minutes. And during that time, you get all those different changes. So 2 and 3 are your progressively deeper sleeps. And REM sleep at the end is a lighter sleep where your body is more metabolically active. Your breathing, your eye movements, all those sort of things, and then you circle back into stage one. So that's sort of the sleep stage physiology. So a couple things. One of the things that people will often ask, they say, "Hey, sometimes I wake up like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm like really hot and sweaty. Why is that?" Well, I'm not 100% sure. We really won't know unless we put you in a sleep lab for a while. But generally speaking, I want you to think about that sleep cycle. Where are the times when the body's metabolism is higher? That's at REM sleep. And that REM sleep happens at particular predictable cycles. So if you're noticing it tends to happen at the same time of night, it's likely that you're coming out of REM sleep during that time. And maybe we can talk about ways to make your sleep better. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those tips a little bit later on, right? Because that really raises your body's overall core temperature when your heart rate and blood pressure increase. And that's a normal feature of REM sleep.
Does that mean it's almost quite normal to expect a little bit of break in your sleep in the night, in between those cycles?
Yeah, absolutely. You can sometimes expect to wake up at some parts of the night naturally. And you can look around and go, why am I awake right now? Did I hear something in the house? Well, that may be true. Maybe it's my cat running around back and forth or crawling over top of me, right? But also maybe it's just a natural part of your sleep cycle. Maybe you're in between sleep cycles. Yeah. And that's actually a pretty useful idea, because as we help coach people for better sleep, one of the things we can talk about is ways in which we can help them plan their night and do kind of a backwards planning time-wise to say, okay, if each sleep cycle is about 90 minutes, if I'm going to wake up here, about what time do I want to go to sleep here in order to make sure that I can wake up during a time in my sleep cycle when I'm more awake. And everybody's had that feeling where somebody has woken them up or their alarm has gone off and they just feel like they're in deep sleep, right? Yeah. They're being woken up during stage 3. And when you're woken up during stage 3 sleep, it takes a long time to get your brain on board. We call that sleep inertia. So overcoming that sleep inertia can be a challenge if you're woken up during stage 3. Your plan is to be right around stage 1 or at the end of REM.
Absolutely, makes sense. The Fitbit app says that, and I'm wondering if this is too simplistic, but it says that the deep sleep is for physical refreshment and your lighter sleep is more for mental refreshment. Is there any truth in that?
Yeah, I don't think it's so black and white, side to side. I would say that so sleep trackers like that probably are measuring your body's movements, right? So it's really it's got a little accelerometer in there that measures back and forth. So that's why it can count your steps, right? Yeah. So whether it's that brand or some other brand name, right? So in the sleep lab, you're hooked up to a wide variety of metabolic markers, right? Up to an EEG in your brain and the whole thing, right? So a little fitness tracker company doesn't have access to any of that stuff, but they can pay attention to how much you move. So if you move less, right, when you move less, that's more stage 3, stage 2 type sleep. And if you move more, that's more stage 1 and REM. And so they're taking all that data from their accelerometer. I'm sure they have some sort of algorithm where they're trying to help you understand what your sleep quality is like. I think it's probably valuable sort of big picture, so you can get a sense of overall how much time are you sleeping, how much time are you moving, how much time do you spend in deeper sleep. So I think that is probably valuable information for people. But I don't want to science it too much because it's kind of limited in what it can tell us.
Yeah, fair enough.
If it tells you how much time when you go to bed and how much time you spend in bed and how much time you spend moving, I would say for most people that is probably extremely useful information to have.
To track and to monitor.
Yeah, absolutely.
We talked a bit about the benefits within that, leading on from the benefits of sleep into why it might be useful for us to consider as physios. I've kind of got a vice versa question in that, is there evidence that pain in particular can affect these benefits? And then what about the impact of reduced sleep on pain?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that we talk the most about, or we should be talking the most about in rehabilitation and physical therapy is the bi-directional relationship between sleep and pain. So as sleep goes up, pain goes down. As pain goes up, sleep goes down, right? So you can see it as a teeter-totter. I don't know is that a word in the UK too?
Yeah.
Okay, right, okay. Good. So it's kind of like a teeter-totter back and forth. There's definitely a bi-directional relationship, and so some of the references that you can pull up on the show notes, and so my presentation included a lot of them, both large systematic reviews and smaller trials that talk about the connection between sleep and pain. And so people who have musculoskeletal pain do not sleep well. People who do not sleep well have musculoskeletal pain. Am I telling you that if you don't sleep well, you'll get musculoskeletal problems? Not really. It's not that simple. So these are big picture correlation things. So in addition to those big picture correlations between sleep and pain, and there's also plenty of strong correlations between sleep and cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack, these kind of things too, high blood pressure, obesity. I mean, the full range. There's also evidence in some smaller trials that when we engage people on sleep behaviors and we help them change their sleep behaviors, they can change their sleep behaviors with coaching, and that those sleep behaviors tend to improve alongside their clinical condition, especially for pain. Right?
Okay, so pain outcomes improve as well.
Absolutely. So I want us to think about this now before you throw out all your tools and say, okay, I'm only going to talk about sleep, right? So that's not what we want to do. I mean, so let's think back about over the last 10 years or so. There's been a big emphasis on helping to coach people to better understand pain, right? So whether that's explain pain or pain coaching or whatever, that came out for a while, and some people grabbed onto that pretty tight. And they said, you know what? All I have to do is explain things to people. It's a little bit of an extreme view, right? I can throw away all my therapy tools. I can throw away any idea about treating the tissue or exercise. I can throw all that stuff away, and I just need to counsel people about why they hurt. And then, great, they'll be wonderful. That's a little bit of an extreme view of that science, right?
True,
and I think that as the science comes out, we're finding that that's not really the case. Each one of these is one key piece of a puzzle. You can't put a puzzle together with just one piece. Right? So while it's important to engage people who've got chronic pain and pain issues with sleep in most cases, it's also important to talk about exercise and stress and explain the physiology of pain to some degree. All of those things are all pieces of a puzzle. So I'm suggesting that sleep needs to be one piece of the puzzle that we look at, and it's not a magic bullet or magic cure for pain or for any other health problem.
True. And do they use, so in terms of the outcome measures for pain, what kind of reliable stuff do they use there? Is it purely kind of objective lab-based stuff, or are there subjective questionnaires that we could use as well?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that some of the systematic reviews that I cited during my presentation, when you look at those, they tend to focus on self-reported outcome measures, and there's also a sleep assessment. There's actually a sleep assessment in physical therapy that people can use, and that I've linked to in my presentation, and that you can see in the show notes as well. So you can have some questionnaire to help talk people through this, and then you can get a sense of the kinds of things that can improve the self-reported outcomes as well.
And so sometimes I do wonder when I'm sat across from a patient asking them about pain, and they might say that their low back pain wakes them up, and actually you're saying it's perhaps not as kind of cyclical as I have pain and therefore it wakes me up and therefore my sleep is affected. It actually can be that they are somebody whose sleep might have been poor beforehand. We certainly get a lot of those patients. Yep. They say, "Is your back waking you up?" And they say, "Do you know what? I'm a terrible sleeper anyway." That's hugely common. So it all becomes a bit of a soup by the sounds of it. It all kind of rather than necessarily a circle.
All those stuff out, right? Disambiguating that whole mess. That's part of what we get paid to do, right? And that's part of the fun, I think, of clinical practice, is that it's not, people don't come in and we don't lay out the algorithm and say, where are you now? Okay, here's your next step. Go do it. I mean, there's really a lot of engagement that happens with that. So sometimes the patient will talk to me about the problem that they're having in their, in their back, knee, shoulder, neck, whatever, and they'll mention poor sleep, and I'll ask a couple questions about sleep, and it's apparent to me that that's not going to be a useful thing to talk about, and then I kind of just pivot and talk about something else, right? And so, the example you use, well, my back wakes me up, but I'm a horrible sleeper anyway. Yeah. Well, I've been able to help a lot of people with some ways to sleep better, and that seems to help people's back pain. Is that something you'd like to talk about today? And sometimes that's a door that opens that can lead you to something positive. And sometimes that's, no, I'm always a bad sleeper. I just need to get this disc sorted out. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll pivot to something else then, right?
Yeah.
So all those opportunities are in play. And I want to help people understand, as things come out during the history and during the time that you talk to your patient, I want to give people more avenues to pursue and more clear tools to use when they're going down those, so that they can have a more comprehensive approach for their patients.
Yeah, that did lead on to one of the questions that I was going to ask. So a lot of patients, if you ask is their pain waking you up, that then rolls into how well they're sleeping in general. But as you've described, some people questioning about things like sleep and things like stress is met with a bit of an eye roll, either because you've lost them and they don't really know what you're getting at, or because you've lost them and they know exactly what you're getting at and they think you're possibly going to put their pain entirely down to stress. And ultimately the gap with our patients in their head, sometimes there is a big gap between the bio and the psychosocial. Do you have any tips on subjective questioning on that, or is it a matter of, as you say, of just picking up on when there's maybe a difference in what they're thinking and what you're thinking, and then possibly even just leaving the subject alone?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably in the second camp. I think, early on in my career, I was much more reliant on, I was very questionnaire driven. So people would come in and like, have you done your oswestry? And, have you done your, Orbro? And then have you done this questionnaire? And then let me look at your FABQ and let's see what the ones are. And so I was kind of like, I was pretty rigid about that, right? And so I said, oh, aha, here, it's right here on my little questionnaire. I know exactly what to do to help. And I've started to realize over time that, and I think you probably have too, people who've been in the field for a while, that it's not quite that easy. So what I want to do is I want to focus on kind of engaging with the patient on especially on the first visit. And I want to look for opportunities that present themselves that seem like they're open doors for the patient's perspective, and get a sense of what they think the main problem is. And if they don't think sleep is the main problem for them, to use Maitland's term, I don't know that that's something I'm going down visit 1 or visit 2.
Sure.
I think that once I get a little credibility with somebody in terms of my ability to help coach and guide them, in terms of my ability to give them things that are not, making them obviously worse, and things that are improving what they came in for their chief complaint for, I have a little bit of credibility with them. And at that point, then we can talk about some of those other big picture things like sleep or stress. And then it doesn't look like I'm writing them off. It doesn't feel like I'm blaming them for their problems, all those other things. Yeah. And you can often use examples from your own life too. And I try to do that a lot with people also. There are times. And so it's funny because you and I were just joking. It's morning for me. It's afternoon for you.
Yep.
But actually it took me a little while to get going in the podcast today. Part of it is because this past week I've had just very poor sleep for one reason or another. And some people may say, well, wait, I thought you were the physical therapy sleep guy. Why can't you sleep? And I said, well, the thing is, humans are tough, man. Sometimes you just don't get the sleep that you'd like. And during that time, it's good to have some tools to find your way out of it. And so this weekend, I was getting what's called recovery sleep. So it's a planned block of a very large block of sleep designed to help sort of catch me up from sleep loss in the previous time period, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at it with patient, that's an ideal kind of a thing to talk about. So there's a lot of different things that can contribute to pain and problems, and a big piece of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find all the pieces in the puzzle that you've got that can help you. And we've already found 1 or 2 things that seem to really be helping. Sometimes it's important to look around for some other things that we can try to see if there's some other items that we can find to help improve what's going on, and see if we can't move forward together. And so one of the things you told me is that you've said that like your back wakes you up at night and you've had some trouble sleeping. Sleep is pretty important, and sleep can affect how our body processes pain. And if you want to talk a little bit about sleep, we could do that. And, I've been successful coaching people to sleep a little bit better, and that has been able to help their back pain in the past. And if you want to talk about that, we could do that today.
Yeah. What kind of
and
things?
So that's a good example of like a transition, right?
Sure. And what kind of things does the evidence, if we had a patient in front of us and we said there's some research on pain and sleep, what kind of things can we say the evidence has shown, and good evidence has shown X, Y, and Z benefits could be had? What kind of things can we describe?
Yeah, great. So I would say, adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Right. And very few people are getting that. Right. And so different groups, such as like the National Sleep Foundation over here in the States, and there are scientific groups, other places in other countries. It's funny. So like let's just talk exercise for a second. So if you look at the American College of Sports Medicine or the Health and Human Services over here in the States, and you look at what their exercise guidelines for adults are, and you lay that on top of the UK's and Australia's and, Sweden's, surprisingly, everybody kind of agrees on the science, right, and they all look about the same, right? So if you talk about sleep, if you talk about healthy sleep habits or sleep behaviors, these things are remarkably consistent across different groups. So when it comes to sleep habits, we've got a kind of a top 10 healthy sleep habits that I walk people through. Number 1 is you want to sleep in a dark, quiet, and cool room. So changing the environment in which you sleep is pretty important, right? Just as changing your environment at work if you've got like a shoulder, neck, or an arm or elbow problem, looking at ergonomics, how they sit and how they move and the tasks they do at work, that's probably pretty valuable, right? Same thing here. This is just the environment in which people sleep. So number one, sleep in a dark, quiet, and cool room. Number two is to go device free. So limit your screen time 1 hour before bed. We can talk a little bit about how looking at electronic devices and having all that light come into your brain and through your eyes, it helps engage parts of your brain that keep you awake and keep you engaged with that content. And so we want to maybe try to eliminate those in the hour before bed. That's number two. Number three is use your bedroom for sleep only. And I've got like a little asterisk by sleep only. Obviously, there's some other things we do in bed that we don't have to talk about right now, but we understand that there's some other things that go on in the bedroom too, right?
Yep.
Enough said. So number four is to nap wisely. So use naps carefully. Don't be afraid of naps, and make sure that they're not so close to the time that you're going to go to sleep that they might interfere with your sleep metabolism.
And I think
Number five,
some people are afraid of naps. I think that there is sometimes that thought of, don't sleep too much in the day because you'll not sleep at night.
Yeah, it's like, don't have something to eat now. You'll spoil your dinner, right? I mean, it's the same kind of concept, right? So I think there's a couple things we face. We face some there's fear of napping, and there's a lot of controversy, in the lay concepts about caffeine. So you've got people who are caffeine shamers, who are like, oh, you can't use caffeine. Caffeine's horrible. You should only sleep. And then you've got people who just take in way too much caffeine, and it is a serious part of their sleep problem, right?
Do you think might be talking to some of the listeners as well as our patients? Yeah. I wonder, the physio community.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about caffeine, because there's nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with regular moderate caffeine consumption, and in fact, it can be very useful in managing sleep. So, but also naps also can. So that's what number four is. This nap wisely. And we can talk a little bit about how to coach people for taking naps to help improve their overall cognitive alertness and manage their sleep debt. Number five is get out of bed if you can't sleep. If you're laying in bed and you can't sleep and it's been 20 minutes or so, you probably got to get up out of bed and do something else. Because just laying there with the covers on, like, I can't sleep. What do I do now? That's not the best, right? Number six is you want to maintain a consistent and regular bedtime. You want to tend to go to sleep about the same time during the night. Don't go to bed hungry. Number seven, make sure that you have a little food in your stomach, at least a little bit. Obviously, not a huge meal, right? Just like swimming, you don't want to eat a whole big meal an hour before you get in the water or into bed. And you want to make sure that your body can be comfortable and ready for sleep. You want to not make sure that any exercise that you do is done about 3 hours before. You want to make sure you're limiting your alcohol or nicotine between 3 and 6 hours before bed. And this is, of all the things that I do, this is probably one of the things I don't do that well. Sometimes I come home at night and I have a glass of wine, and that's within the 3 to 6 hours of bedtime. So maybe I should, I could have a glass of wine at work. I don't think my boss would like that.
No, they tend not to.
He's really inflexible about that. It's crazy. And the last is you want to limit your caffeine intake. You don't want to have any caffeine within 6 hours before bedtime, because that's 6 hours is the metabolic time for caffeine generally for most people most of the time. So those are kind of the top 10 sleep habits. And depending on the person, they might do one of those things really well and one of those things really poorly. So we don't want to do all 10 of those things at once.
Right.
You want to talk to your patient a little bit about what their sleep habits are, and then figure out, okay, where's the low-hanging fruit? Where's the sleep habit that most could benefit from a change, right? And then you can kind of start there in terms of coaching.
True. And behaviour change, I think, sums it up. We are in the business of behaviour change, and often we think of it as just being activity, potentially maybe some nutrition change. But there is this whole, as you say, 1/3 of our lifetime where sleep is a behaviour, and we're not having much input at all really at the minute as healthcare professionals. But is that something that you would like to see? Obviously, would like to see change or
absolutely,
or see
absolutely. I think one of the stories I tell early on in my presentation, I think you nailed it, was we're in the business of behavior change. I could not agree more. I thought for a long time my job was the evaluation and treatment of musculoskeletal problems from a non-surgical rehabilitation perspective. That's actually not my job. As you stated so well, my business is behavior change. And so that the degree to which I'm successful is entirely dependent on how I can help people change their behavior. Because if I can't help people change their behavior, I am not much good. And that we really need to get people in healthcare generally and people in physical therapy, physiotherapy specifically, to turn that corner mentally and get in the idea that, look, my whole point here is to help this person change. How can I help this person change? Right? And that might be activity, it might be exercise. I might need to help them change to integrate this new exercise that's going to help their chronic musculoskeletal issue, or it might be make a change on the nutrition side, or make a change on the sleep side. And all of these or on the stress side, all of these are important parts of people's overall health and their function and their success. And behavior change and function, that's what we do in PT.
Yeah, fair enough. And then just think about the evidence again there with benefits to pain. Do they look at quantity of sleep or quality of sleep? Potentially both. I suppose they're in sleep labs, they have that luxury. And which would you say is most important for a patient with persistent pain?
Yeah, I would say that in the absence of sleep lab data on an individual person, talking too much about sleep quality may not be a valuable thing to do, right? So if I know someone's sleeping 7 hours and I know someone's sleeping 4 hours, say, worrying about the quality side to side there may not be so valuable. If people are spending a lot of time in bed and reporting that they are getting a lot of sleep, but not being rested and not feeling rested, that is probably the strongest indicator for me that sleep quality is a problem. And I would say, especially in adults, the first thing that we should think about is sleep apnea, and whether or not we want to engage somebody on the primary care team, general practice physician, nurse practitioner, PA, whoever is managing the primary care for that person, to consider whether or not sleep apnea is a factor. And there's a questionnaire or two out there about sleep apnea. There's some questions you can ask about sleep apnea to help be a good member of the healthcare team and pass information back and forth, right? But so in terms of sleep quality, I would think that the only real measure we have for that clinically, practically speaking, is a sense of the patient feeling rested and restored with sleep. And so for me, the overall sleep behaviors, as people's quantity improves, the quality tends to do too. If you're not sleeping well and you change and you make your room darker and cooler and quieter, chances are very good you'll sleep more, and chances are good you'll sleep better quality-wise too. So I think that from our perspective in PT, I don't want to split those two things out, quality and quantity, as distinct constructs. I think it's all related in terms of the overall sleep behaviors.
Yeah. And are there any markers that someone might say or somebody might present with objectively that makes the alarm go off in your head of thinking, I need to talk to this person about sleep in particular?
Yeah, I would say so first of all, I think anybody who's got a chronic pain problem of any kind, that probably needs to be on your mind at some point. People who seem tired, people who yawn. There's actually a physical therapy sleep questionnaire that you can use. I talked to you before about how I was real questionnaire driven early in my career, right? But I heard something from Dr. Sandy Hilton, who really kind of helped me with this a little bit. And she talked about, look, she said, it's not about a question of using or not using a questionnaire. It's not a question about scoring it or not scoring it. If you give it once and you've got elements on that questionnaire that the patient scores as kind of not good, and other areas where they score them as areas that are pretty good, you don't need to use that from a questionnaire perspective. You can pull that question out and say, okay, that's a concept that I need to look at, right? So if your sleep questionnaire says, I often wake up and I don't feel rested, you don't have to say, okay, I just need to use that for the purpose of scoring the questionnaire, and then I'll give them the questionnaire later and see if it improves. No, you can pull that out and say, you told me that you often don't feel rested when you sleep, or you told me that you often wake up during the night with pain in your knee or your back or whatever, and maybe that's something we can talk about too. I would say that it's rarely people don't come to us with pain because they want to sleep better. So trying to force that or shoehorn that into the first couple of visits is not likely to be successful. Now, if you spent some time in the pain education or explain pain world, I think you've already noticed that. When people come to see you, they don't want to hear you say, well, actually, let me tell you all about how pain works. It's all about nociception. Like, people don't want to hear that, right?
Yeah. Straight off the bat, yeah.
Yeah, are we going to get there? Yeah, guilty. I was guilty of that myself.
Well, I think we all have been.
Yes, no kidding, right? It's not some of my finest hours, that's
Yeah.
for sure. But so it's one of those things that you can weave in a little bit later. It's not something people come to you immediately for, but it's an opportunity that you see during the time that you talk to a patient and help engage them, because you're also talking about all these other factors all the time. One of the things I want to help people understand is that they're already doing this with their patients. They're already talking to their patients about all the different things that might affect how they feel, all the different things that might affect what their function is, and how to improve their function and improve the way that they feel on a daily basis. They're doing this all the time, right? Whether you take the stairs or not, like lifting, form can be relevant for some people, like how much you move during the day, ergonomics of what it is that you're trying to do. PTs are doing this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Just want you to do this for sleep too.
Yeah.
It's not this idea that you're in clinic and you're talking to somebody and you're like, oh, excuse me, attention everyone, I'm now going to talk about sleep. No, it's not like that.
Yeah. It's all part of the lifestyle.
It's a natural part of the overall management we do for patients that we're already doing on so many areas. I just want to add sleep as an area that we can also think about for people.
Is there any data about the I suppose the risk factors of say low back pain we know can be fear and catastrophizing and things like that.
Yeah.
Do we know where sleep fits into that at all?
Oh yeah. Poor sleep and poor self-reported sleep and insomnia are highly correlated with back pain especially, but a wide variety of different pain problems, including neck and shoulder and knee too. And so the citations that I have in my handout for you that I think you'll be able to see in the show notes kind of talk about those things. And if you pull some of those papers, many of which are free full text, you'll start to get a sense of how that connects. So in Pain Cloud, one of the things I did is I took like this map of the United States that was like sort of like a heat map of different kinds of health problems. So the first one I think was like high blood pressure. So places in the states by county that had higher rates of blood pressure were darker colored, and places that had lower rates were lighter colored, right? So you can see where the focus of the problem is geographically, right? So there was that map that was there, and then I put the map for heart disease. Gosh, it looks a lot similar to the high blood pressure one. Then I put the one up for stroke. Also look the same. And then I put the one up for self-reported sleep disturbance, and it looks almost the same.
Right.
So these problems come together and they come in clusters, right? And so worrying too much about chicken versus egg or what causes what, I mean, that might be interesting and relevant from a big picture research perspective, but for your average clinician who's sitting in a room and a patient comes in to see them, what causes what is completely irrelevant. The only question is, what options do I have to help this person change? Yeah. What options can we explore together to improve these things, because they tend to come in clusters, and as one thing improves, other things improve as well.
Sure. And no doubt improving their, even if you improve their cardiovascular, I don't want to say symptoms, but their cardiovascular presentation, there's going to be benefits for that in terms of lifestyle and pain and things like that. So I suppose there's...
Yeah. I mean, does regular exercise influence somebody's risk profile for cardiovascular disease? Oh, you bet it does. Does improving someone's sleep habits, the quality and quantity of their sleep, does that improve their cardiovascular risk profile? Oh, you bet it does. Yeah. All these things are kind of related, right? Sure. And so we need to think about, when patients come in, that there is this big puzzle there that we get to assemble, right? And that's part of I think what's so interesting about clinical practice is that it's not up to us to search through the puzzle pieces and find the ones that we like best, right? Because there's a fair number of people who still do that. They want to try to force every patient into their personal paradigm, right? Yeah. I really like manual therapy, so I'm going to be stretching everybody or doing this to everybody, or I'm going to be poking everybody with a needle or scraping them with a metal bar. Apparently there are people who do that. I don't know. So we can't do that. We have to look through there and find the puzzle pieces that the patient gives us first. We have to start from where they are, not from where we are. It's got to be a patient-driven process, not a clinician-driven process. And that's part of what makes it fun. It's almost like a ride. Like, you don't know where the ride's going, but you're there with the patient taking the ride together, and you're trying to give them the best advice you can each time the next turn comes around to get them to the bottom safely. Sure. And that's really a big piece. Sleep can be a huge part of that process. Coaching people for better sleep habits can be a huge part of that success for people.
Certainly, yeah. It sounds like one of the things that could pop up on the ghost train.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I wondered as well, we've obviously talked a lot about the benefits of sleep. These are the sort of things we can give advice to people. Are we at risk of keeping people up at night over this? Do you think people lose sleep over their lost sleep?
Yeah, well, I would say it probably depends on the way in which we bring it up, right? So, does helping people understand that they need to be more active, does it give them a sense of shame and make them less active? Well, it might, but I think it depends on the positive way in which we bring that up. And for me, that's where the coaching piece comes into that. So a lot of times clinicians will look at this data about sleep, and they'll look at like the 10 sleep habits, and they're thinking, man, there is no way I'm going to be able to do all that with my patients. I would say, hang on, I didn't say you had to do all that.
Sure.
Let's start small. Let's start small with something that people can do today to help improve their sleep habits. Some people call it sleep hygiene. We don't want to use the term sleep hygiene. There's nothing dirty about sleep.
I remember
right?
that from Pay Cloud, yeah.
So, exactly. So the question is, instead of worrying about what happens in an outcome for something, let's talk about the process. Let's talk about a process that we can help people with that will help move them forward, that isn't a scorecard and isn't something that will make them feel bad that they didn't achieve it. So I like to talk to people about setting goals that are process goals instead of outcome goals. Right. So let me give you an example from exercise. So an exercise outcome goal would be, can you lift, so you got knee arthritis, can you do a straight leg raise with a 5-pound weight at least 10 times without losing your full knee extension, right? And then maybe the patient can do that, maybe they can't do that, maybe they can't do that, and maybe they get a little disillusioned sometimes. I don't know. Maybe that's a piece of the puzzle there. So that's an outcome goal. I want to help people, especially when it comes to sleep, start with process goals. So I'm not necessarily going to worry too much about how many hours the person slept 2 weeks after I started coaching them. But if not getting enough sleep is a problem for them, I'm going to pick a process goal that helps them. So whether they did their part is the key thing. So in this week, I want you to be in bed, lights off, before 9 p.m., at least 3 nights. But what if I don't sleep well? I'm not worried about that. You can't control that right now. Let's just start small with something that you have control over, and you can have control over when you get in bed and when you turn the light out. And if you do that well at least 3 times for the next 2 weeks, let's set that as a goal. Now, that's a process goal, not an outcome goal. And that's something that patients often feel they have more personal control over. And it actually gets at what we're really talking about. Because when it comes to behavior change, we're talking about behaviors and we're talking about habits. I'm not worried about outcomes. I'm worried about habits. I'm worried about processes. I mean, if the patient he's got a nice, cool, dark, quiet room, if they're in bed 7 to 9 hours before they need to wake up, if they've limited their caffeine to, not within 6 hours of their rest time, if they're doing all of those things on a regular basis, I'm very confident whatever outcome we're talking about will improve. And I don't need to chase that little outcome. I don't need to chase the restfulness or the cognitive wakefulness or the memory and recall. I don't need to chase all those things if I can focus on behaviors. Yeah. Behaviors are what people can most control, and that's what we're supposed to most help them with when it comes to behavior change.
And it sounds like it's more about giving them the tools and empowering someone. You're right, somebody could say, right, all this week, I did have those 3 days where I was in bed by 9 p.m.
And that's a huge improvement from the last couple weeks. Yeah. So we're going to build on that. Great job. But I didn't feel rested. It's okay. The most important thing is slowly changing habits. Yeah. And you are doing that. And that's awesome. Very proud of you. Let's talk about the next step, right? Okay. So then it can become a lot more positive for people. It's often disillusioning when people start something new if they don't get some sense of early progress, if they don't get some sort of early win. Yeah. And it's hard to get an early win when you're focused on outcome. Oh, man, look, your oswestry is still 38%. Oh, my gosh, what are we doing wrong? That's not a recipe for success if we're going to help people change, right? Yeah. Now, if their oswestry is 38% and they're also subjectively better on a number of things, how many people has that happened to, right? I have that happen all the time, right? Yeah. Their subjective outcome survey that they fill out is not that much better, sort of that way, but they're telling me and communicating to me that they're way better in some other areas. And so I think that we could benefit from focusing a little bit more on that piece.
Yeah. And as you say, on sleep as a behavior, not a thing that we need to keep kind of clutching at. It's a prolonged thing. It's a behavior more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, for me, so like I have a really busy job in kind of
Mm.
hospital administration, and so I work over 60 hours a week. Because I'm sure many of the people listening to this podcast, you work just as hard or harder than I do, and so you know how hard it is to fit something like fitness in there.
Yeah.
And so for the longest time, I was really focused on how much weight I could lift or how fast my run time was and all that stuff. And I have found a lot of freedom and a healthier approach to fitting exercise into life. To just my goal is to get to the gym 3 times a week
Mm.
and to get a good 45 to 60-minute workout in. And
Yeah.
if I do those things, I'm confident that good things will happen for me, cardiovascular fitness and strength and all those other things. But I can't get wrapped up into the details of exactly how much did I put on the bar, exactly what was my time this time. I can't wrap up my head in those. I just don't have the cognitive bandwidth for those things, given the current job I'm in. And if you're listening, many people might hear themselves in this too, right?
Yeah.
As busy as all are, right? So I'm focused on the process of getting to the gym, not necessarily the outcome. Now, I don't just get there and lift a pink dumbbell 3 times and go home. It's not like that either, right? So I am putting some intensity in, but for me, it's about focusing on the process. For me, the behavior of showing up to the gym 3 times a week. Showing up is 80% of the deal, right?
Cool.
It's the same thing for patients. Let's focus on a behavior that they can change right now today, and move them toward better health by changing their behaviors, not worrying about the outcomes.
True. Why do you think it's taken us this long as healthcare professionals to get to sleep and to get to its benefits?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say big picture, number one is we just didn't have much data.
Right.
And I would say that number two, there are people who are going to be listed. It's July 28, the end of July 2018 as we record this, but there are going to be people 5 years from now who listen to this podcast or who still are not engaged with sleep. So how long does it take for something new in medicine? How long does it take for a new finding to enter clinical practice? Anybody know? It's hard to be too exact about this.
Yeah. But it's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it suggests about 17 years. Ouch, right? So when you ask the question, why is it taking us so long? I would say that, well, it's still taking us long because we haven't done that. I mean, there's some people who are doing that and there's some people who are not. Yeah. And so there've been a series of papers recently and they're spot on about the difference between the evidence for good treatment of low back pain and then what actually happens and what people are actually offered. Because surprise, surprise, they're generally not offered evidence-based treatment, right? Yeah. And it's the same for sleep. Right. So it's going to take a long, long time in clinical practice before talking about sleep is common, and helping people sleep better and seeing the connections of sleep to the other health problems they're having is common. It's not going to happen anytime soon. So if you're listening to this and you're worried about being behind, don't be. Yeah. You can pick this up right now. Start adding this into your clinical practice. Again, it's not something new and different. It's not crazy. It's not out of left field. This is all stuff that you're accustomed to doing all the time. You coach and mentor patients about health behaviors all the time. We're just giving you some additional options in sleep and helping you work your way through that. And I think that it will be another 20 years before that's common enough that you even hear that talked about in your average clinic. Yeah, and it may take longer before the average person as a healthcare provider does it with any kind of reliability.
Or before the average patient expects to be talking about their sleep in a
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to educate we need to make sure that there's an education campaign in the lay press about this too. It can't just be there's nothing medical about sleep. There's nothing medical about exercise. There's nothing medical about nutrition necessarily, right? Yeah. So we need to make sure that the ideas and concepts about how to live a healthy life are common in our society, independent of whether somebody's in the clinic or not. Yeah. If we wait till the time they're in the clinic to try to change some of those health behaviors, we are way behind the power curve.
And how evidence-based would you say, just to get an idea of it, how evidence-based would you say that sleep is for pain? Are we very early days in the evidence, or is this gathering a good foundation now?
I would say we have a pretty strong foundation so far. I would say that the evidence is much stronger in terms of correlation between sleep and pain and correlation between sleep and various health problems. We have a lot of very strong evidence there. Where we're building our evidence slowly is in terms of interventions, in terms of intervening. How reliably can we change someone's sleep habits? Yeah. When we change someone's sleep habits, exactly what effect does that have on the healthcare outcome of interest for us, whether that's, high blood pressure or, asthma or chronic pain or, or obesity or whatever you'd have. And so I would say that's where the evidence is emerging, for lack of a better term. We have solid early evidence in randomized trials that you can change people's sleep behaviors with coaching, and that those sleep behaviors translate to improved clinical outcomes. Would I like to tell you that there's tons of trials for it and it's a slam dunk? I would love to say that, but I can't say that. It turns out sleep science and sleep interventions in the clinic are going to be exactly like every other intervention we have in medicine. It's not going to be a new, brilliant magic cure for everything, right? We thought exercise was that, right? And as we look, is exercise important? Yeah. Is it key for people with chronic pain? You bet it is. Is it a magic cure for pain? Oh, no, it's not. Same thing with explained pain, same thing with stress management, same thing with pain education coaching. None of these things are magic cures. They're all one piece of that puzzle. They all can have a positive effect on things. But it depends on the person, how you apply it. It depends on the condition in which it can be more successful. There's just a lot of that uncertainty. And we need to get to the point where we are okay with that uncertainty. In clinical practice, we need to get to the part where we accept that when a patient comes in, I don't have any idea how representative this patient is compared to all the evidence that I already know about this problem and how I apply that with this particular patient. It's all going to come down to connecting between the healthcare provider and the patient and engaging them on behavior change on a day-to-day basis. And I think that that's where it's going to end up.
Absolutely.
Sleep is not different than anything else that we talk about in clinical practice. It's not different in terms of its magic impact. It's not different in terms of its value to individual patients. It's not different in terms of its overall importance to a healthy lifestyle. All of those things are the same. This is all stuff that we should be very used to talking about and very used to understanding and applying in physical therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to highlight that, getting comfortable with uncertainty. I think that's exactly right. And I think as physios, often we are sometimes brought up in our careers to project a confidence of, yes, I know what's going on, and sometimes we hang our hat on things. But I think you're right. It's more useful to have a sense of vulnerability and openness. And we don't know it all. We don't have the magic answer, as you say. And none of these things will ever be the magic answer.
No, I think, and so if we're looking for that, then I think that's our mistake. I think that what we can feel and what we should feel mentally, what our mental posture should be that, look, the difference between what I know and can help you do in PT and what you're actually doing now is very large. I am very confident that I can help you a great deal. Now, how much I can help you, on what aspects of things I can help you, maybe that's a little less certain. But I think people should be very confident as they approach sleep, like they should approach a lot of other things. They should be very confident that the difference between what the patient knows and what they know is large. Yeah. And in the ability of that our people have in PT and in medicine generally to help change people positively can be very large also. And so I think that we have every reason to be confident about approaching this. The devil is in the details, so to speak, in terms of the individual patient engagement and coaching. And I think we just need to do a better job of being more deliberate in helping our folks in physical therapy be more comfortable with the coach and mentor role. Yeah. Somebody talked about, a buddy of mine, I can't remember who it was that said this. I saw it on their social media. It's, most people in medicine, they want to be Batman. We really should be focusing on being Alfred.
Right.
We're the hero of the story. We're the wise. We don't want to be Luke Skywalker. We want to be Yoda, right? So we want to be the wise guide and coach, and we're not the heroes here. We want to build a story in which the patient is the hero, and we're just that sort of wise guide on the side, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a really useful message. What I wanted to ask about as well is, I know that quality of sleep generally deteriorates with age. Is there any specific advice we can give to elderly patients with regards to their sleep?
Well, I think the most important thing when we talk about age is we need to talk about the fact that sleep needs vary by age group. So your average adult needs 7 to 9 hours of sleep, but people who are older tend to need less sleep, but people who are younger need more. So you've got people who are school-age children; they should be getting between 9 and 11 hours of sleep a night. So they should not sleep like adults.
Yeah.
right? I have memories of my mother during the weekend coming in and waking us all up in the morning to get us going on our weekend chores and stuff. And looking back, I mean, that probably is not the right thing to do. Letting children in that age group sleep, that's definitely something that we should be doing. So older adults need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Adults sort of in the prime of their life, so to speak, or more middle age, need 7 to 9. There isn't a huge difference in terms of sleep amount. Sleep quality or the restfulness of their sleep can change based on health problems that they have or some of those other things. But I would say the universality of sleep habits and sleep behaviors is true across the lifespan. Similar to exercise, right? Sound familiar, right? So sleep isn't different than exercise in that we need to tailor it to the individual person. Some of our patients who are elderly have different set of challenges that they face. Some of them are facing the exact same challenges that adults in their 50s are facing, and therefore they should be doing exactly the same things. So it really does vary that way. But it is important to message that the sleep that we need varies strongly based on their age group, and younger people need more sleep. I mean, newborns need 14, 17 hours of sleep, right? Toddlers 11 to 14. I mean, there's large differences in terms of sleep need. Especially for younger people. And so some school districts in the States, and I think this might be true in other countries as well, have started to shift their start time because the start time for school is pretty early. And so that is not healthy for a child's development because if it limits their sleep quality and it limits the total time they're in bed. So pushing that period back a little bit is helpful because younger children, they have a different sleep cycle than adults do. They're awake at different times, right? Yeah. They tend to be awake later, but they tend to need to sleep later in the morning too.
Got you. And likewise as well, a patient group that we don't often talk about in the Physio Matters podcast, but inpatients and wards and hospitals and kind of the sleeping in that area. Have you had any experience in dealing with inpatients or delivering education within that setting? Have you got any advice for our colleagues on the wards?
I sure do. What I'd like them to do is not to change anything radically, but just let's start looking at the evidence. Let's start looking at the evidence for sleep quality in an inpatient environment. There's quite a bit of evidence about how ICU stays are major stressors in people's lives. So independent of whatever medical issue brought them there, whether it was trauma or serious illness or whatever else, but it being in that environment, the constant noise of the machines, the light, the activity, how disruptive that is for sleep. I mean, there's a lot of data about how people have post-traumatic stress from their ICU stays, right? And so at my hospital, which is a military hospital, a big part of what we have our nursing and provider teams do is engage ways to help patients get better sleep. So changing the lights, changing like how often we come in to wake them up for vital sign checks or whatever, how we can change the alarms on the various machines that are in the ICU to reduce the amount of sound that they're receiving all the time and reduce the amount of time that they're awake. It also has interesting connections to healthcare, right? So in the critical care setting, there's a lot made and discussed about alarm fatigue, about how provider and nursing teams hear so many different alarms all the time that it's hard to disambiguate an alarm that's just, hey, the battery's running out on the IV pump versus, hey, this patient's about to flatline, right? Yeah. So the efforts that we make in terms of sleep quality there translate into better care quality in other ways. But sleep is especially important when people are ill. And I hope people who are working in an inpatient setting spend some time pulling some of the evidence for that and the evidence of how improving that sleep environment for patients can improve their stay in the hospital and improve their overall clinical course.
Fair enough. Have you, as a physical therapist, been involved in that? I'm sure a lot of physios listening will say, "Well, it's great, but I'm not there at in the night time." What sort of influence could they have?
Yeah, well, I guess I can't speak for other folks, but just for myself. But I'll say, so at the large hospital that I worked at when I'm in administration now, but when I was the head of physical therapy at the large hospital that I work at, I had an inpatient group and I had an outpatient group. And just because I come from the outpatient world doesn't mean that I don't think inpatient care is important. I mean, I do. I made an effort to really prioritize that. I talk with our inpatient crew about what the things that we can do to change that, and they were part of the process to help get that changed. And so if you're working in a hospital during the day and you're not on the night shift, you don't need to be on the night shift in order to talk to the nursing staff, talk to the provider staff, talk to the patients about ways to improve sleep, talk to the patient, hey, you're here in the hospital for, this kind of problem, and, we're helping you get up and stand a little bit and walk a little bit better and be more functional, because there's tons of great evidence for early physical therapy and early activity and mobilization for the hospitalized patient, which probably is another podcast. But hey, while you're in there with the patient, you're talking to them, hey, how's the food? How are you sleeping? Are you getting enough sleep? Just big picture things like that. Oh, I really can't sleep. Really? How come? What's going on? Well, the nurses are coming in and get my vital signs all the time. And there's this thing over here that's beep, beep, beeping. Oh, okay, well, maybe I can engage a little bit with that. Maybe go out and talk to the charge nurse and say, hey, what's the schedule like for their vitals? Or, there's this machine making noise, keeping them up at night. Is there anything we can do to, so all those things, on a peer-to-peer basis you can use as well. I mean, just because it's not your job to be there at night doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some sense of responsibility or influence on the care that happens in your hospital or clinic.
Sure, and with your patient. And as you say, this is more than just a conversation topic of, oh, how did you sleep last night, Mrs. Jones? This is something that if we can improve it, may have an impact on their pain. Would you say their function as well?
Yeah, well, I think that there's some strong connections from an epidemiological correlation spot there. I mean, I think a lot of the early interventional studies in sleep have been, really kind of hyper focused on the outcome of interest, whether that's pain or, blood pressure or anything else, right? And so there's certainly low-hanging fruit in the sleep world generally to kind of expand that focus when it comes to interventional trials to try to improve a lot of different endpoints.
Yeah. And so going back to the outpatient setting, on more familiar territory, if we've got a physio in front of us who is already pushed for time within, let's say, an NHS 20-minute slot follow-up of someone with persistent pain, and they're thinking, sleep could be a really useful thing to focus on with this patient. They've maybe done a bit of the groundwork. What would be your kind of top advice for what they should prioritise within that session?
That's a good question. So, it's funny, this kind of time crush is ever present, right, for all of us. So 20 minutes in the NHS, is that like all across the country?
That's a good question. Certainly within the areas I work in, it's 20-minute follow-ups.
We think we're certainly all constrained with time, and nobody has plenty of time, regardless of the country you're in or the system you're in or whatever. Nobody's got all the time that they need, with their patient, or all the time that they would like to have. And so when I talk to clinicians about like some motivational interviewing concepts, some people say, I don't have time to talk to people like that. I have a limited amount of time. I got to ask my questions, and they need to tell me what's going on, and I need to tell them what to do, and I don't have time for all those questions, those open-ended questions, and I say, look, here's my thing. I don't have time to not do that. Mm-hmm. I don't have time to not engage a patient and let them tell me what their main issue is. I don't have time to guess. I don't have time to pull my personal toolbox out and make every patient the kind of patient that I would like them to be. I don't have time for that. I have a limited amount of time. I've got to spend it wisely, and I've got to engage with my patient and let them tell me what the main issues are. So I'd say for most people, if you're feeling crunched on time and you're thinking, how can I add sleep to this? My best advice is don't pull it out early. Pull it out a couple of sessions in and look for opportunities. Look for people who express frustration at their restfulness at night. Look for people who appear tired. Look for people who are verbalizing that their pain or their issue is giving them a problem with sleep. That's your early indication that talking to them a little bit about sleep might be helpful. And think about those 10 sleep habits. Think about starting small with something the patient can control, like what the temperature of the room is, how dark the room is, the kind of light that's in the room, blue versus red. We didn't get into that, but we can get into that another time. That's important. That's something that you can start with the patient today to help improve. And so when you're limited for time, the first thing that you should think about when it comes to sleep is you don't have to get it all in on the first session or two. Maybe that's an issue for a couple of sessions in, and it's also an issue that you want to make sure that you feel from the patient, that there's some indication from the patient that that's something that you should pay attention to. And then when there is, find a behavior that's key and key in on a behavior.
And if you're happy with this, we can put the 10 tips on the show notes, if that's or in the
course,
Google Drive.
Yeah. No, those 10 tips are everywhere. They were taken right from large sleep societies and large medical societies, so they're very common. Cool. So we'd love to see them there. And
it sounds like you'd probably recommend going through what a patient could do within those 10 things, rather than, here's a handout, off you go, here's some information about sleep.
Yeah, not helpful. Yeah. So do I give them a handout? Yes, because it's nice for them to have something to look at later. But I want to help them. I want to figure out for them what they're most interested in. So sometimes I'll sit down with the 10 sleep habits and say, look, here's some things that we can do to sleep better. Is there one of those that you had a question about, or you have any concerns about any of those? And oftentimes that's the time. Look, here, there's no way I could do this, doc. I'm like, oh, okay, no problem. Well, hey, it says, number 4 there, it talks about caffeine, and it talks about the caffeine intake. Maybe that's a place to start. I mean, you want to talk a little bit about caffeine intake, because that can really affect sleep. Well, yeah, I drink coffee. Oh, really? So how much coffee do you drink? When do you drink it? It might be good. If you're drinking caffeine within 6 hours, that might be a piece of the puzzle. And maybe that's a good place to start. So for me, when I'm going through my day, because I get tired in the early afternoon like everybody else, my caffeine window closes at 4 p.m.
Right.
Because I need to be asleep by 10. So I don't have caffeine after 4. Like it does not happen. Yeah. I don't have a soda. I don't have tea. I don't have coffee. I have no caffeine after 4. It's funny. That one little thing changed my sleep quality more than anything else. Changed my ability to sleep better more than anything else. I got to this performance triad program where we were teaching this stuff. And as you look at this science, you're like, oh boy, I'm not doing some of these things very well myself.
Right. Yeah.
Changed a lot too.
Yeah, I was going to say there'll be colleagues of mine whose hearts are breaking at the thought of not having a coffee after 4 p.m.
I know, but that's only one of those. That's only one of the 10.
Yeah.
If that doesn't seem reasonable or possible for that patient, no problem. Skip it. Let's work on something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't have to do all 10 perfectly every day forever. And I mean, it doesn't have to be that extreme. So I looked at that. And so I remember looking at this, kind of at this stuff and talking to my wife about it. And she was like, she said, there's a lot of this stuff that you don't do that well either. She said, maybe you ought to try some of these things. I'm like, yeah, I probably should. And so, we looked at a couple of, tweak this, tweak that. But the thing that helped me the most was stopping caffeine before 6 hours before I got to bed. I was shocked at the improvement that had on my sleep. And that was just me. For some people, it's going to be different, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, that was one of those things where I thought to myself, man, this stuff really works. Yeah. This science it's not just published in paper. It's absolutely practically applicable to what we do and what our patients do every single day. And if we can find that factor for that patient that makes that difference, that has a huge impact on their overall health.
True. Yeah. No, that sounds brilliant. I think not only a great summation on sleep, but also on behaviour change and the kind of the ways we can change that in clinic. So thank you very much for your time, Jason. That's been brilliant. Is there anywhere that you'd like to direct our listeners to for more information, either about yourself or how to get in touch with you, or about sleep in general?
Sure. So I think in reaching me, probably the best way to do that is at Twitter, and my handle is at Jason Silvernail, all one word, and the Twitter handle will be in the show notes, I'm sure. Yeah. When it comes to sleep, you could certainly start where a lot of people start. They can start with a literature search. But what might be helpful is to go to some of the organizations, scientific and otherwise, that are out there that produce guidelines for people. So one of the biggest ones that's evidence-based over here in the States is the National Sleep Foundation. And so that's a great place to go first. So they've got like a more scientifically oriented website, and they've also got like a more media-oriented website. They've got a whole bunch of different articles about different things. Flip through those. The 10 sleep habits are there. There's articles about caffeine and alcohol and pain, stress, how to get better sleep when you're traveling, all those things. As you look through all those articles, you can start to see, based on the patients that you see, my gosh, there might be some helpful articles I can direct people to here. Mm-hmm. And that will help build your skill set. I mean, I think you have to know the sleep science, first of all, and then you have to be able to coach people for change. And I think for most PTs and physios, I would hope that the second part, the coaching, I would hope that's a little bit, they kind of have that down.
Right.
Their issue is that we need to get them spun up on a little bit of sleep science so they can start to find that. And the National Sleep Foundation is a great place to start to help understand big picture, sleep cycle, sleep physiology, how to coach people for better sleep behaviors, all that stuff.
Brilliant. Excellent. So I think something for everyone in that podcast. That's fab. So thanks again, Jason.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me.
You too. Thank you.
It's such an interesting topic that I bet very few of us are aware enough about. I mean, it's something that hopefully there's a few people that ask that question and can give basic advice, but the huge importance of the topic and the importance of quality sleep and the act of being underslept and what that means for chronic diseases, chronic ailments, and potentially even chronic pain, although, of course, more work to be done in that space, is really, really interesting. So really thanks a lot to Flick and to Jason for that episode. I learnt so much. I hope you did too. Remember, reform.physio/conference for tickets to the conference in Manchester, 5th and 6th of October. Please join us on Patreon if you haven't already. We've got a few of you more increasingly doing that, which is really nice, just throwing us a few quid to help us keep chipping away at what we're doing. And we're going to be increasing content soon. We've got some really big announcements coming probably in a matter of weeks, actually, between these episodes. If you keep an eye on social media, you'll be hearing more from us and how we're going to be increasing content, and that's going to then be a consistent thing, which is really cool, not just for patrons but for everyone, because the patrons keep wanting us to produce open access content so they can persuade their friends and colleagues as well, which is really cool of them. So please do join us on Patreon and support us, the Physio Matters podcast on Patreon, on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course at TPM podcast on Twitter. Today's interviewer at Felicity Thou on Twitter. I'm at Jack A. Chew, and of course find us all across social media to support and feedback for this episode and beyond. Really appreciate your thoughts, and any reviews you might throw us on iTunes is really helpful for our ratings. And I've just remembered this really cool review that we got on Patreon, which was really nice. I think I'll read out to you because it warmed my heart when I came across it. I don't think it's even that recent. It just clearly had passed me by. So let me read this out to you, see if this inspires you to join us on there. So this is from a listener who said, I've been tuning into the podcast for over a year now, and it's just about time I show my appreciation for all the work that you do. TPMP has been a wonderful resource. I respect the value, the foundational integrity and honesty one requires to discuss such topics of controversial nature as those which are provided a platform by TPMP. Not to mention, Jack Chew's philosophical tendencies make these discussions all the more interesting. A platform for open and critical discussion is crucial for advancing our efficacy as therapists. TPMP inspires us to challenge ideas that do not seem to be rationally rooted. Lead the charge. Continue inspiring acceptance of challenge and change. That's from one of our new patrons. So thank you so much for that, whoever you are, and also hope that inspires a few of you to maybe throw us a few quid to keep doing what we're doing, if you do indeed appreciate it. So that's enough from me. I said at the start of the episode I wasn't talking a lot on it, but I still managed to shoehorn myself in, didn't I? But I can hand over to our today's guest, Jason Silvernail, for our cheesy sign out, which I know is the highlight of all of your months. So I'll see you next month, if not before. Do tune in on social media to get more updates from us and a few live streams to boot in the coming weeks. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Physio Matters podcast, discussing physio matters because physio matters.